Hello everyone, this is Collects Fallen Stars, and I'm here with a video about why you shouldn't give up on Kim Eun-sook's The King Eternal Monarch on Netflix. If you're one of those people who have given up after maybe 3 or 5 episodes, this one's for you. Because this K-drama has been getting mixed reviews 10 episodes into the season, and it has boggled my mind as to why this has been happening. It's a grand project. It has a robust storyline, has beautiful cinematography, the likes of which is done usually for full-length films, and it has a love story between two adults who behave like adults and not in perpetual high school. It's very different from most Korean dramas I've come across, and that alone is enough reason to watch it. Granted, I have not watched many of them, so maybe I don't really know what I'm talking about, but what I am sure of is that I get tired of things very easily when they've become predictable. See, before The King Eternal Monarch, the last Korean drama I watched was Something Happened in Bali, and that was way back in 2004. Then the coronavirus happened, billions of pesos were given to the government, but then no mass testing happened, and I thought, okay, let's go to Netflix and escape. K-dramas with beautiful autumn colors should do the trick. I watched maybe one or two series in full, but soon found myself giving up on the ones that came next. Watching them one after the other made it clear that they were built more like romance novels. No matter how different each premise was for a series, they always followed a pattern. And patterns, while they may be dependable, can sometimes be boring. And then I decided to give The King Eternal Monarch a try, even though the binge watcher in me disagreed with it, because at the time it had only like 8 episodes. Um, but then um, it was, what was this? Maybe 2 weeks ago. So there I was, Netflix open, and I had lunch ready of pork stew and rice in front of me. And then the series opened with a serene view of a bamboo forest, wind blowing gently through it, and then the voice of a man talking about the legend of a bamboo flute back when the monarchs ruled Korea. So I thought, oh, okay, it's a historical series. And then a minute and then 40 seconds later, it cuts to a man covered in blood in what looks like a police interrogation room in modern day Korea. So then I thought, oh, okay, it's also detective fiction then. So then I gotta watch out for red herrings. But then, wait, that man covered in blood, Lee Lim, is supposed to be 70 years old, but then he doesn't look a day over 30. I mean, yes, Korean genes and skincare are magical, but not to this extent. So then the idea of immortality is introduced, which suggests that the series has supernatural elements too. This means world building for these magical elements and forming rules that govern them. I mean, if you look at Bram Stoker, Anne Rice, they all made their vampires perish under the sun. And then, of course, Stephanie Meyer chose to make them sparkle. So, if you're going to introduce all these um, fantasy elements, you got to have your own specific rules and how that world works and how the people in it should move. And then 4 minutes in, we get a flashback to winter of 1994 in the Kingdom of Korea with a letter C. So then I'm thinking, oh, is it a typo? I guess not. So then we see Lee Lim again, the bastard son of the former king, murdering his half brother, the current king, in order to steal the bamboo flute that grants the owner much power. The king's young son, 8-year-old Lee Gon, witnesses his father's murder, struggles with Lee Lim, splits the power laden bamboo flute in half, and then nearly dies if it weren't for a mysterious figure coming in to save him. The mysterious figure drops an ID card with the name and picture of Lieutenant Jung Tae-yeol on it, and then Lee Gon clutches it, along with the half of the bamboo flute. Lee Lim, meanwhile, escapes to the forest with his broken half of the bamboo flute. And then he comes upon a pair of obelisks, passes through it, and then lands in Korea with a K. Lee Lim then comes face to face with the face of the person he had just murdered, except he isn't a king anymore. He's just an unkempt, unemployed man We now have the introduction of parallel worlds and doppelgangers, and it had only been 18 minutes into the first episode. So then I put it on pause, finished my lunch quickly, cleared the table, and then settled down on the couch to watch. I did all that before resuming to watch it because it clearly wasn't the kind of K drama you could easily watch while eating, glancing up and down between the screen and your food, missing bits and pieces of the missing bits and pieces of the subtitle here and there and not paying any mind. Because of its structure, the kind of story it wants to tell, and the breadth of its narrative, it demands your full attention. So I get why people find it difficult. I found it difficult. I had to pause it and then finish everything else before, going back to the series. But it was infinitely exciting. It's as if someone laid out a puzzle with a thousand pieces and a maze, connect the dots, and spot the difference in front of me and told me to play with them all at the same time. So, what kind of story did Kim Un-suk want to tell? She began with the murder of the parents of Lee Gon by his bastard uncle, Lee Lim, who feels he has been deprived of power for too long and intends to take it all for himself. It becomes a story of both sides seeking justice for their own separate tragedies. Now, to flesh out this story, she has to give Lee Lim a plan for world domination and then give Lee Gon a defense strategy in place as well as an active pursuit to entrap his uncle. She also has to give them motivations, conflicts, moments of doubt, and triumph. If this were the only story she wanted to tell, a linear storyline with flashbacks and flash forwards should be enough. Throw in a romance, love triangle, a bromance, one final obstacle, two chaste kisses, one passionate kiss, one tearful kiss, one reunion kiss, and you will arrive at your happy ending. But Kim Un-suk, I think, wanted to do more. She expanded Lee Lim's plan for world domination into two parallel worlds. Adding science fiction to the mix complicates matters because you will have to build another world that is visibly different from the other, even if they are parallel to each other. Audiences should be able to tell one apart from the other quickly in order to keep up with the story. And I think that was one of the difficulties of The King Eternal Monarch because the Kingdom of Korea and the Republic of Korea look almost exactly alike. It takes almost a few seconds to recognize the royal seal or the European inspired trams running in the background to ascertain that the scene is the Kingdom of Korea. But once the characters appear, it becomes easier to tell which world we're dealing with. Jung Tae-il and the police force belong to Korea, I mean Republic of Korea. Then once you see the royal staff, the family, um, prime minister, and the cabinet members, they all belong to the Kingdom of Korea. So the only ones at this point, I think episode 8, um, the only ones to traverse between both worlds are Lee Gon and his uncle Lee Lim. So therein lies one of the criticisms for Kim Un-suk's work. The pace is too slow. I would argue, though, that the pace is just right when you're creating two worlds with very different characters in each, whose stories run parallel to and interweave with each other. It's very easy to place all evil characters in World A and all good characters in World B, but then that's lazy writing and also ugly writing. So Kim Un-suk humanizes and fleshes out a significant amount of the supporting cast with such care, developing them alongside the major characters. So, usually in dramas, the side characters will get hints of a backstory here and there in an episode and then have just one episode dedicated to them. Kim Un-suk did so much more, and in effect, her two parallel worlds became so concrete with real, moving characters contributing their bit into two separate forces of Ligon and Lilim that are about to clash. It creates anticipation, excitement, and then it spreads your heart out amongst many characters instead of investing your emotions into just the main leads. But aside from the science fiction element, Kim Un-suk also takes on the task of writing detective fiction into her already robust narrative. Lee Lim is essentially building an army of doppelgangers from the Republic of Korea and then planting them in key positions in the Kingdom of Korea. He then takes the dead bodies of these Korean citizens and then drops them in the Republic of Korea, leaving Lieutenant Jung Tae-il and her squad in the police force with a trail of unsolved cases. And then detective stories by themselves are difficult enough. You begin with a dead body, search for clues, weeding out weeding out which clues are significant, chasing a lead, failing, planting and then ignoring red herrings, closing in on a suspect, interrogation, a surprise turn of events, so on until the murder is solved. But then Lee Lim didn't just leave one dead body in the Republic of Korea. There's an entire army of them. And Jung Tae-il has to be on the trail for some of them in order for her to work with Lee Gon to solve them and in turn help him uncover his uncle's plans. This brings us to one of the major criticisms of this drama, the romance between Lieutenant Jung Tae-il and King Lee Gon. Apparently, there's not much of it, as it has taken a backseat to the struggle for power in Korea by the Prime Minister, Lee Lim's murderous spree and body switching between the two worlds in a bid for two world domination, and murder investigations that Jung Tae-il and her squad must carry out in Korea. Would I like to see more of the actors Lee Min-ho and Kim Go-eun on screen? Yes, of course. But as early as the first episode, it was already apparent that this was not going to be the usual K-drama. They weren't going to meet cute, fall in love, fight their feelings, work on a murder mystery on the side, finally confess, become a couple, fight the final boss side by side, and then live happily ever after. Fantasy, science fiction, detective fiction, all bear equal weight with romance. It was different, and I found it absolutely interesting. And just because romance doesn't dominate 80% of the story does not mean that the romance is lacking. The first episode tricks you into thinking that there is very little romance in this drama. The lead characters of Lieutenant Jung Tae-yeol and King Lee-gon meeting each other for the first time in the last 6 minutes of an episode that was 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 15 seconds long. What can possibly develop and deepen in 6 minutes? Not much, right? But what happened in the last 6 minutes? Lee-gon rides into Gwanghwamun Square on his white horse after having crossed over from the Kingdom of Korea and into the parallel world of Republic of Korea. He creates a slight commotion, what with his royal handsomeness and almost ethereal white horse. Lieutenant Jung Tae-il reprimands him. Lee Gon recognizes her as the woman on the ID card his savior left behind 25 years ago, and in dramatic fashion, he alights from his horse, walks towards her, stops, and then engulfs her in a tight hug. He tells her, "I've finally met you." And then the episode ends with a shocked Jung Tae-yeol in the arms of an almost reverent Lee Gon, who was basically a stranger to her. Um, in Kim Un-suk's other wildly popular work, Goblin, The Lonely and Great God, the first meeting between Kim Shin and Eun-tak also had that moment of finally finding the one that they've been searching for. But for Goblin, his bride's existence was merely functional. He needed her so he can finally die in peace. So their first meeting was your typical first meeting in K-dramas. There were no feelings yet, but then they developed from there. So the whole drama then became a stage to establish the growth of their relationship that would give him the will to live instead of dreaming of death all the time. But now, in The King Eternal Monarch, the first meeting isn't an easy blank canvas. Ligon bursts into the first episode, already halfway in love with Jung Tae-yeol long before he's even met her. As a child, Ligon had held on to Jung Tae-yeol's image as his savior. There's deep gratitude. As a young orphaned monarch, he held on to the idea of her to ease his loneliness, because his first duty as a king was to bury his father, and then he learned how to cry only in the privacy of his own room when he was 8 years old. But somewhere out there, there was someone who cared enough for him to actually save him. So this thought sustained him as he grew up. And at this point in the episode, we are working with the idea that time travel hasn't been introduced yet. Later on, I think it will be, which means that we're treating time as a straight line, allowing Ligon and Jung Tae-yeol to age at the same time. So if Jung Tae-yeol had been 30 years old when Ligon had been 8 in 1994, then she would be 55 years old and he would be 33 in the present year, 2019. So then, as a man in his 30s, he still keeps on searching for her, but in his head, she is frozen in time as a 30-year-old woman in her ID picture, and at this point, he might possibly be half in love with her already. When he finally meets her in the flesh, he had spent nearly all his life loving her in different iterations. Finding out that she hadn't aged as he thought she would have gives him another possibility of loving her as a man would a woman. So now the audience has to grapple with this idea that he had loved her for 25 years already prior to seeing her in the flesh. But then if you add the idea of travel time, of time travel as hinted at by the 10th episode, then this first meeting becomes heavier. Not only would he have loved her for 25 years, but he also would have loved her for 25 years multiplied by the number of timelines he had crossed as a time traveler. That's why their first meeting had to happen in the last 6 minutes of the first episode. Everything that happened in that first hour and 6 minutes, all the murders, plotting, collision of worlds, and clash of doppelgangers in the past 25 years, had to happen in order to bring Ligon and Jung Tae-yeol to that fated meeting at Gwanghwamun Square. Kim EunSook had played with the idea of destiny with Goblin, the lonely and great gods Kim, Shin, and EunTak. Now she takes the same idea of a fated meeting between two souls, Ligon and Jung Tae-yeol, and proceeds to tear them apart with time loops, parallel worlds, and a frozen dimension to test how their love can endure all of that. So there can be no slow burn. There's no chase that starts with attraction, denial, bickering, jealousy. No, you make me worry so much love confession that's so often found in K-dramas. The lovers don't even have that poor girl, rich boy, immortal, or whatever uneven power dynamic that's so popular in dramas, because they're both equally important in their own worlds. He's a king and she's a detective. But I guess ultimately it's what most people are looking for, because these things were built to be formulaic, and I guess, people learn to look for them. But now you have a writer who is trying to build a bigger, more ambitious story, who is willing to take some risks with that formula in order to tell a love story that can transcend time and universes. The stakes had to be raised higher, the backdrop made grander, in order to hold a love story as epic as this. How can this not be romantic enough? So there are only a few more episodes left in the series. Quarantine has been extended. Please give this series a chance. So yeah, that's all. That's all I have to say. So I hope you enjoy watching it. If you do, watch it.